Welcome to another flying video with Flight Level 180. Today's airplane is a Cessna 182. This is a 1977 Cessna 182S, so that makes it about 26 years old. It is powered by a 230 horsepower Lycoming IO540 engine. It has 6 cylinders and is fuel injected. It has a glass cockpit with vacuum-driven backup instruments. Specifically about the 182, this is a very popular airplane as a step-up airplane from the trainer level. It's really not considered to be a trainer, but it's the first level up of performance from a trainer such as a 172. It's a high-performance airplane, which means it has a adjustable pitch prop, so you can control the pitch of the prop from the cockpit, and it has power that's greater than 200 horsepower. It has a slightly faster cruise speed than a trainer such as the 172, so this airplane will fly in the 130 to 135 knots range versus 115 for a faster trainer. It has a much higher useful load, around 1,200 pounds versus in the 900 range for a pretty good trainer. And it has a much greater fuel capacity, so this airplane will have 88 gallons usable, while a 172 will carry 53 gallons. So you have greater range and you can stay in the air for a longer time. It's a much heavier airplane. It's less sporty and more solid than a 172. Think an SUV versus an economy car is maybe the comparison. It's generally a more expensive airplane to operate. Probably all in, depending on how you use it and how it's maintained, it's going to run you about $200 to $220 an hour, while a nice 172 will run you about $160 an hour. And airplanes that are similar are the Piper Dakota and the Piper Cherokee 235, very similar airplanes with similar engines and similar performance. Now, as we look at this airplane, you're going to see that it's not a perfect airplane like you see in the Sims. It has wear and tear from 26 years of usage, and there's flakes in the paints and cracks in the plastic and such forth, but it's generally in excellent shape due to continued and aggressive maintenance. And we're going to look at everything. We're going to look at the exterior, the control surfaces, and the interior and such forth, and really give you a good look at the airplane. So let's start a walk around and look at the external details first. Now let's look at the front of the airplane. And if you look at the cowling, you'll notice that the engine compartment is much larger than that of the 172. It's really a big engine and a pretty big nose and quite heavy. And as you look at the front here, this is the variable pitch prop. You notice it's a 2-blader, not a 3-blader, and some pretty well engineered engine cowlings there. And if you look at the accessibility, like the 172, you cannot take and pop open the cowling to look at the engine. It's just not accessible. You have to unscrew all those screws, and that's not something a pilot would normally do on a pre-flight. If you take a look on the top of the cowling, you'll find the oil access door, and you can see over here on the right there's a plug. I believe that's to test the electronics, so I've never messed with it. And then you have the dipstick here, which you can unscrew like I'm doing there, and you can see the oil coming up, and you can measure the amount of oil that's in the engine. And the range is 4 quarts to 9 quarts. You really want to be in the 7-quart range. Looking at the right side of the airplane, you'll see 4 items you'll see on both sides. The first is a little step for getting up on the wing, and then the pitot-static port for the pitot-static system, and then you have an air vent that blows air into the cabin. And if you slide up here, you'll see a handle that you use to climb up on top of the airplane. I'll show you how that's used. And then just to orient you of where the oil access door, this is where it is, right here. Let's look at how you get up on top of the airplane. You grab the handle here, you put your foot on the step, and then you jump up there like that. It's not a little bit of an athletic maneuver. And you see on top there's some GPS antennas there, and some comm antennas, I believe. And there's the tail, and there's some access doors, and then on each side of the wing there is the fuel filling port. And then as you look out on the rest of the wing, there's really nothing there beyond the fuel port. Now let's jump back down to the ground and look at the right wing. And you can see there's not a lot on it. There's a few scuffs and scratches from age, but other than that, it's pretty clean on the right side of the wing. But if you look in here, here's the strut. And then if you look here in a hidden port, there's a tie-down ring that actually pops out and goes back in for a little bit of aerodynamic efficiency. And then there's a fuel vent port there. And then sliding down the strut, you can see there's a step for when you step up on the right strut, you can put your left foot on that strut. Let's move back to the tail of the airplane. Now, as you look at the beginning of the horizontal stabilizer, you can see the ELT antenna there. And here is the horizontal stabilizer, and you can see there's some, some scuffs and nicks on it, but it's generally in good shape. And here is the elevator, which controls pitch. And you can see on the back there, it moves up nicely, and you can see there's the trim tab. So when you move the trim wheel, it moves this little control surface there. And as we slide up the tail, you can see there's the rudder there. It's a pretty sizable rudder for this airplane. And up on top, you can see there's more antennas. There's static wicks all over the airplane. That's what's on the back there. And there is the branding. And up here on the left front side of the airplane, there is the static port that is on the opposite side from the other side. So you have redundancy there. And then we have the strut with the same steps, so you can get up to the left tank. And there's the door. Looking at the left wing, you can see here this is the pitot tube, which in conjunction with the static ports gives you your airspeed. And then in the 182, it has a flap. You can see that's for your stall warning, unlike the 172 where it's a vent. And then we have the landing and the taxi light here. And then nothing out towards the end of the wing. This is the front wheel pant, and you can see some oil stains and some patches that have been done over the years. And looking up here, these are the cowl flaps that you can open and close in flight to give you a little extra speed in exchange for cooling. Looking at the left main gear, you can see the wheel pants and all the nicks and scrapes that have happened to the paint over the years. And the last place we'll look on the exterior is the baggage door. And this is on the left side of the fuselage, and you open the door by pushing the little button and it pops right open. And you can see there's some space in here. It's not huge, but it's definitely bigger than what you have in the 172. Room for some various things like we have in here. Let's look at the seats in the 182. And as you can see, the fabric is nothing special, but they're generally very comfortable, good padding. And even more important, there are 3-point harnesses on all 4 seats. So generally safe. This is a much more comfortable airplane to sit in than the 172. You have more shoulder room, more leg room in the front and the back. So generally this is a much more comfortable traveling airplane than the 172 is. Jumping up into the cockpit, you can see on the top left, you can see the fuel indicator, and underneath that black square is the JPI engine monitor, which I believe is an essential piece of equipment for any airplane. And underneath that, you can see some legacy engine gauges on the left. And to the right of that, you can see vacuum pressure and amperage. Vacuum is the measure of suction to run the gyroscopes, and amperage is your charge and battery situation. Going to the right of that, partially hidden by the yoke, you can see the manifold pressure gauge and the fuel flow gauge. And going up from there, you can see the turn coordinator, and above that, the airspeed indicator. To the right of that, you can see the Aspen PFD, and we'll turn that on in a second. And to the right of that, you can see the altimeter, and to the right of that, you can see the Aspen MFD. And underneath that, you can see, I believe it's called a CDI for tracking VORs and ILSs and such. And to the left of that, you can see the RPM gauge. And underneath there, you could see the buttons for the various lights. Moving over to the right side, I put labels on a number of the items since it's a bit confusing as to what is what. We can see the Aspen MFD that we saw on the other side of the panel, just to orient you. And then to the right of that, starting with the audio panel, that's at the top of the stack and allows you to switch between radios and such forth. Below that is the centerpiece, which is the Garmin GNS 750. I believe these are about $13,500 to $14,000 to purchase, and then another few $1,000s to install. So expensive piece of equipment and very capable. Underneath that is the GNS 430, which is an older nav comm GPS panel. And underneath that is the Bendix King Autopilot, which is pretty old, but it's still very capable. And underneath that, you can see with the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 buttons at the bottom is the transponder. To the right of that, I don't have it labeled, but you can see the flap switch. And to the right of that, you can see the cabin pull air, which I have labeled with an arrow. And going up from there, you can see the yellow arrow is pointing at a strike finder. So this is something that detects lightning strikes in the distance so you can navigate around thunderstorms. Above that is the backup attitude indicator, and that is run by a vacuum system. That's indicated by a red arrow. And to the right of that is another GPS system. It's a legacy Garmin 696. And this airplane is generally over-instrumented. There's just, there's no need for 3 GPSs. You could actually get by with just the GNS 750. And the 430 is a bonus, but the 696, I just never use that. And I don't know if anybody that flies this airplane does. Next, let's power up the panel and take a peek at the engine monitor. And this is a JPI engine monitor, and you can see it gives you EGT and CHT on all 6 cylinders. And you can see those the blue numbers and the white numbers across the row there. It gives you manifold pressure and RPM. It gives you fuel flow. It gives you a number of systems monitoring on a number of items, and there's actually a lean fine mode, which is a really nice feature. When you add power to the Aspens, you can see how capable these are. So you have a HEREIN system on the top with an attitude indicator, and you have the altitude on the right and the speed on the left. And at the bottom, you have the HSI. Really nice to have those combined into one instrument and have get rid of the vacuum pumps for that. No more precession. Generally, they're extremely reliable. And on the right side, I don't have that fired up, but that MFD, you can put a lot of different items on there. You can put a moving map on there. It'll show you the airport diagrams, and you can show terrain on there and all sorts of other things. So really capable thing to have both of those panels. Sliding over to the radio stack, you can see on top the GMA 340, and this allows you to switch between COM 1 and COM 2 or activate the audio for the nav channels. It allows you to isolate the pilot from the passengers and such forth. It's a pretty capable piece of equipment, but it's pretty old, long in the tooth, and Garmin is talking about stopping support for it. Underneath that, you can see the GTN 750, which is also a Garmin piece of equipment. And in the top left, you can see the radio, and then you have some distance measuring items. And then over on the right, you can see the interface with the transponder and then the nav frequencies. And underneath that, you can see the moving map. This is an incredibly powerful piece of equipment. There's so many different features. It's actually hard to know all the little subtle things you can do with this piece of equipment, but it's pretty awesome. Underneath that, you can see the GTN 430, which is essentially a backup instrument to the GTN 750. Has similar features, but just not as rich, and that's what we use for the second radio. Underneath that, you can see the autopilot, and that has up and down vertical speed. It has altitude hold, and it'll hold a heading and a nav course. So, middle of the road, but very capable when it's working. And underneath that, you can see the transponder. On the bottom of the center console, we have the throttle, the prop control, and the mixture. And underneath that, you can see the legacy EGT and CHT gauge. Those aren't very useful with the engine monitor. And then we have the rudder trim right here. It moves the tab on the rudder, and then the pitch trim, which moves that on the elevator. And then over here you have the cowl flaps, which opens and closes those doors underneath the engine for cooling. And at the very bottom, you have the fuel control, and that you can move it to both, which is vertical up, or you can move it left or right. So that wraps up our overview of the 182S. I hope you found that interesting. Overall, it's a great airplane to fly. It's very capable. It's a bit expensive to purchase and own compared to some of the other options that are out there that are faster, but if you're looking for a solid airplane that can do almost anything, it's really a good choice. Next up will be a 1960s Debonair, so you can see a fast airplane with retractable gear and the differences are there. And I'll see you in the next video.